The American Adoption Congress, 13th International Conference, April 11th to the 14th, 1991 in Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, tape number 55A.
Will come in quietly. My name is Cindy Shacklett, and I'm the coordinator for Concerned United Birth Parents in Orange County. And I have been privileged to have met the four gentlemen to my left through this birth parent experience, not my personal birth parent experience with them.
There's always time.
Shut up, John. And these men have showed, I think, immense courage and certainly strength within themselves to come to a support group and sit there oftentimes with a room full of women who weren't particularly happy with the birth father involved in their particular experience. So we will address today some issues that certainly are in the birth father's life and probably some ongoing things as well. Curry Wolf is the birth mother.
Not a birth father.
No. Curry Wolf is a birth mother in San Diego who has a support group there as well. And Curry and I are both certified searchers who encounter many, many people of the triad throughout our search for the other person. We will briefly tell our stories and then we'll let the gentleman take over. I'd like to tell you the years of experience that are on the panel. We have from 5 years as a birth parent to 31 years as a birth parent and years in between. So we have a very recent relinquishment and we have one of the longer relinquishments of experience here. I'll briefly tell you what happened in my case, and then I'll let Curry tell her story briefly, and then we'll turn it over to the gentleman, because this is their workshop. And we are very open to any questions that you might have, and I can even shut that door if you'd like, and we can just be real candid with each other, and hopefully we'll learn a little bit or a lot from each other today. My birth parent experience started in 1965. I had dated the birth father for some time, and I was very much in love with him. He was panicked by the situation and did not really know what to do. In retrospect, I looked at his own family and found that he was his parents had divorced when he was under 2. He did not grow up with a father much in his life, and certainly didn't really know that there could be hope for a family to survive all this. I was sent away to an unwed mother's home in Arizona. I was a resident of California. I did not see or hear from him during this period. My father, who was probably the most gentle person in the world, was going to absolutely go get a shotgun and kill him. And I said, "But why would you want to go to prison? You know, it's really stupid, Dad." So he didn't, and I'm glad he didn't, because it was, you know, it's not. It wasn't solely the birth father's blame or fault. I mean, we shared that responsibility, but it took us a few years to figure that out. Anyway, I reconnected with him in 1966 in March. Our daughter was born December 31st, 1965. And he told me when I called him back in Aberdeen, Maryland on his way to Germany, that he really didn't think that I was pregnant. He thought I was trying to trick him into marrying him. And he was shattered. And so off he went to Germany that next day, and we started writing back and forth, and this rekindled a love that I'm sure was still very much there. I went to Germany to see him. He came back to the States to see me on leave. We became engaged, and then in 1968, I think I was near a nervous breakdown and decided I couldn't stand this anymore. This was going nowhere. And during this period, we didn't talk about this child. This was just something that happened, and we were just going to go on and, I suppose, heal each other's wounds as ill prepared as we were. So we broke it off, and I went on to move away from the area in Los Angeles, moved to Orange County. About 15 years later, in 1985, or right around that time, I had just been back east on a vacation, came home, and quite frankly, my marriage was pretty much in the toilet. And out of the blue, I get a call from the birth father asking me if I'd ever thought about searching for her. Now, I haven't heard from him in 15 years, or almost 16 years at that point. And I said, yes, I have, but I don't know what to do. He said, I've really thought about her a lot lately. And I said, well, maybe it's because she's getting older. Well, this just stirred up a whole lot of stuff. And I wound up going into counseling because I felt that my whole life was falling apart around me, and really didn't realize that the core of this dysfunction in my own marriage and life was the adoption issue. To be quite candid with you, I think that I married for the wrong reason at the beginning, but the therapy and looking at the marriage distantly said, wait a minute, you've invested a lot of time and a lot of energy and certainly a lot of emotion in this relationship. Isn't it salvageable? Well, yes, it was salvageable, and our marriage healed when I, as a birth mother, stopped being grateful to the man that I married because of the shame and guilt that was imposed upon me within my religious and home structure. I was supposedly, I'd be lucky if anybody married me. Well, that's ridiculous, because I certainly was a worthwhile person, and the shame and guilt came from within my own family. So they weren't helping me along, and of course this was a subject we couldn't talk about at my mother's home where I had lived. So anyway, that seemed to resolve quite a few issues with me, and I realize now, and quite honestly, that the birth father will always be a part of my life and my heart. There is no way that I can consider him a bad person in this. We were both very young, and I to this day, I just have no animosity for him. I have love for him, but it's a different love. And I just want the best for him, and I've told him that. And I relocated him a couple of years ago, or I should say reconnected with him again. He lives in Washington State. The other day, I just happened to go home for a few minutes. I don't live far from the hotel, and I was to take my husband up to the university for a class, and the phone rang. And I went over, I thought, oh, it's my husband calling me from the softball field. What is this? And I went over and said, hello? And he said, well, are we grandparents yet? And I said, well, yes, we are. It was my daughter's birth father calling because she's expecting a baby at the end of April. And she had the baby on April 4th. And I don't know how he called, why he called at that particular time. I've been home 40 minutes in 2 days. And it was just incredible. We had a wonderful talk. He said he was going to be in Phoenix, where she lives, in May, and did I think it'd be all right to call her? Well, it'd be wonderful for him to call her. She has had interest in seeing and talking to him, because she's only seen my side of the family and met her half-brother and sister, who are my children that I've raised. So this will be another connection for her. And there was a time, if I can regress just a little bit about back into the marriage situation, there was jealousy, and there was a big threat of this birth father being in any way contacting me again or being in touch. I finally put my foot down and said to my husband of almost 20 years, let's just pretend he's an ex-husband. Because that's really what the relationship is. It was very intimate. Yes, we were sexual with each other, and yes, we had a child. So why don't you just pretend he's an ex-husband and he's real? And he has had pain too, and it's not appropriate to be angry with each other, because they said, this is not going to do us any good. Because if you feel that way about him, how do you feel about my daughter? Or, that's 20 to 25 years old. This seemed to really help our marriage get back where it should, was dividing that birth-parent relationship from the actual marriage relationship. And he doesn't have to be a bad guy. I mean, I really wish that in time he could come to my home and meet my husband and my other two kids. I mean, he's a nice person. He's no saint, but he's a nice person. He's no one that needs to be cast aside. He had hurt and pain over this too, and I was very surprised at that. So now life will go on, and now he's a grandfather at age 44, and I said, well, we were just awfully young, so what the heck. But this whole experience has been very enlightening for me, and I had no idea that he walked around with the pain that he did for so long. His marriage did not work out. He married the same day that I did in 1970. His birth date, his birth month and day are the same as my 18-year-old son's. So there are a lot of parallels that keep throwing us back together, and sometimes it's a little eerie, especially that phone call yesterday. It just blew me away. But there is a point of healing in all this, and I think that each one of us has to take time, and you have to step back and look at it and say, maybe it just wasn't all his fault, and maybe it could have been handled a lot more differently, and certainly a lot more compassionately for everybody involved. So anyway, that's essentially my story, and now you know I'm a grandma, so that's my big news for this conference. Curry?
He hasn't seen a picture of it.
No.
When was the baby born?
April 4th.
Oh.
I told her to have it after April 14th, but she didn't cooperate. But she's always had a mind of her own anyway.
You'll excuse me, I'm going to sit down. My back is bothering me, and so I can't stand up. Well, I'm Curry Wolf, and I'm from San Diego, originally from Pasadena. Went to Booth Memorial in 1966 and gave birth to my daughter on May 28th of that same year, thank God. This is a birth father panel. I feel very odd as a woman sitting with the birth fathers. But I have a part to my story that Cindy felt was worthwhile sharing, since the birth father that I was involved with was Mike, and I loved him very much. And it was a very intense relationship. I think that he was the love of my life. If we are all to have that one true love, he was it. And it was just unfortunate that I was 17 and he was 18. And we also had a major problem. We're not of the same race. So at that time in 1965 when we met, actually we met in 1964 in our senior year of high school, the race thing was pretty big. His race was Japanese. It still is Japanese, for that matter. You know, and which in some respects might be the race of maybe more choice in acceptance than, for instance, the black race, which we have Brian over here, which I went to the racial thing yesterday and learned quite a bit about that. I lived in Pasadena. Watts riots were happening. A lot of things going on. There was a lot of racial tension in Pasadena in those mid-60 years. So if you were not white, you know, you were a minority, and you were not allowed to associate as a white, upper middle class, pristine person that I was and am. I mean, I came from the Lily White neighborhood. No one of black color was to be in our neighborhood after 6 o'clock at night. It still held that way until I think it was around 1970. So the racial thing in the neighborhood that I grew up in was pretty strong, and so, you know, for even today to a Japanese person it was equally as bad. And of course, you know, then there was Pearl Harbor, and that's sure stuck a lot in my parents' minds. So I'm just giving you this racial thing because that was really, I think, the core issue on the reason why Mike and I were not allowed to marry. And we should have. I really think we should have. And so I was told, you know, that don't bring that goddamn Jap home. You can't have that baby. Yet I wanted to, and I continued to see him. And so I did. And so obviously I'm a birth mother. The story is normal. I went to the maternity home and all that. But the best thing about my story is the birth father. He stuck with me the whole way. We went to the attorney's office, which we didn't want to do, but our parents made us do this. And his parents' attorney and his parents tried to convince everybody that he was not the father, of course, you know, saying, well, you know, she's just very promiscuous and all this kind of stuff. And he stood up for my honor and told them that I was a virgin and that he knows I'd never been with anyone else and that he had never been with anyone else and that it is his child. And I respect and admire him for that at that age when we were both scared out of our minds. It was so intimidating to sit in a lawyer's conference room and have this going on. It was just awful. And he stood with me in that and backed his parents down and said, no, this is my child. And he said, when it's born, it'll be very visible that it is. You know, which that's one good thing about being racial, you know, is it shows. You know. So anyway, that part was something that meant a great deal for me because he could have cowed down to his parents and said, well, that's true, it could have been somebody else. But he didn't. He loved me tremendously and I loved him. So at that particular day, we made a vow and a verbal agreement with our parents and the attorneys that we would never see one another again, that it was in our best interest not to nurture on this relationship. So we immediately said, of course, and we saw each other about a half an hour later, and continued to see each other every day, practically, until 9 months after our daughter's birth. I went to the maternity home. I had to make mental notes on exactly how to get there because I couldn't sit in the back seat of the car saying, okay, now you go down the Pasadena Freeway, then you get off at Avenue 64 and you hang a left and you go down to Griffin, and then you go down to Booth Memorial. I do know how to get there now. And it was a rainy day and all that, and I was waiting, sitting in the back seat saying, please don't forget how to get here so you can tell him, so that I could call him from a phone booth the next day. And he came and he visited me 2 to 3 times a week for 4 months while I was there, and he saw his daughter in the hospital and everything, and so he was with me. He supported me. I went to Cub. I told a lot of people that story, and birth mothers that had the runaway birth father. I think we're a little angry that I could say that I had such a wonderful birth father. He still loved me. I still loved him. But after the surrender, it became difficult, and just as Cindy said, we could not talk to each other. We were in such pain. We were told to go home and forget. The counselors had told him, you won't remember this. And it was just weird. So we continued dating, and I finally moved out because I couldn't stand the situation. He was still at home, and his parents started, grounding him again when they realized I must be back from that home. And so we dated for a while. Our relationship started falling apart, and I met my husband. And I finally broke up with the birth father, realizing that I had to get out of that situation. It was too painful to see him every day, to be making love with him and not having the child in that same house with us that we had created only a few months, or I gave birth to a few months before. So I broke up with my husband, with the birth father, in January of 1967, and I married my husband on May 29th, 1967, which was a year and 1 day after my daughter's birth. So I've never been able to totally forget my daughter's birthday or quite have a very nice anniversary, because it's all wrapped up together until I was reunited. And then I told my husband, I said, well, now I've healed that part of my life, and let's go out and have a nice anniversary. Which he said, it's about time. He's been very patient with me. But anyway, that is what I had during that time, and it was wonderful. And I too also married for some of the wrong reasons. I also married my husband because I felt that I should marry the first man that came along that said he loved me, because I was told that no one would want damaged goods. And having a sexual relationship damages a woman in one way, but giving birth to a child just totally makes you filthy. You can have sex and it doesn't show, but you give birth and give life, and that is awful, and that's what was in my mind. And so I married my husband, and for many years I kept thinking about the birth father and what was he doing. And he knew we got married. I had told him we're getting married. He had come by a year later and kind of told me he was going to get married, which he doesn't ever remember doing. Said he was going to marry a Japanese girl to make his parents happy. He never did that. He was told he was not allowed to deal with Caucasians anymore. He was not to speak to anyone of the white color. Because those were not his parents' words. I'm sure they were a little more vivid than that. And so I thought of the birth father quite a bit, but then I needed to have a child right away to replace my daughter. So I have my son David. He's 21 at UCSD, great student, wonderful young man. Proceeded to want to have another son, or another child, wanted a daughter, of course, to replace my daughter. Had my son Aaron, and who's a wild and crazy kid going to City College. And I have a wonderful husband and a wonderful dog, and a very nice middle-class life, and a very nice community, and nice job, and so forth. And I've lived that kind of life to protect myself, because I couldn't let anyone know that I wasn't perfect, So anyhow, I found Cub in San Diego, which has been my lifesaver, as I think any support group attendee would say. And through Janet Appleford encouragement, get your non-ID, do a little searching, do this and that, and so I did. And through the process, I reunited with some high school friends, and we were sitting around having what we called the Little Chill, because the Big Chill had just been released. Having a little chill one Sunday morning, having brunch and champagne, and someone said, "So where's Michael?" And I said, "I think he's in LA. His name's in the phone book. I'm sure it's him." And they said, "Well, why don't you call him?" And I said, "I couldn't do that." And they said, "How long have you known he's in LA?" And I said, "Oh, a couple years." And they said, "Where's the number?" I said, "I think it's in my wallet." And it wasn't. I wrote it on a little tiny piece of paper, so I probably lost it. And they coerced me into at least trying to call him that Sunday morning. So I said, give me some more champagne. And maybe we can do this. It had been 17 years. And I went in. I was at this guy's apartment, and the only phone he had was in the bedroom. So I had to go into the bedroom. So I was lying on the bed, which is what got me in trouble in the first place with this man I was getting ready to call. And I thought how odd this was. And so I called information, and I knew there were 2 listings for him. One, he's a photographer in Hollywood, and his residence. And so I thought, I'll be real safe. It's Sunday morning. I'll call the studio. He won't answer. I won't have to talk to him. Because I have these people out there that I know will kill me if I don't, because they wanted to talk to him as well. So I called, and he answered the phone. And I said, oh, hello. I knew it was him. I knew his voice just instantaneously. But I said, is this Mike Hashimoto that went to John Muir High School in Pasadena? And he said, yes, it is. Like, who wants to know? And I said, hi, it's Kathy Culbertson. And he goes, oh my God, where are you? Oh my God. I mean, it was just like he was out of control. And of course, I didn't know where I was, and so I said, well, I don't know where I am. He said, are you on something? And I said, no, I gave that up. And, you know, in the 60s and all. And I said, no, and he says, well, where are you exactly? And I said, well, I'm lying on John Duddy's bed. I can't even say what he said with that, because he just said, you are? And I said, yes, and I said, I don't know if I am in Arcadia or Duarte, or we drove as far as Covina. I'm on Foothill Boulevard, that's all I knew. And if anyone knows that area, Foothill Boulevard is 40 million miles long, and it goes from city to city to city to city, and I was not driving, so I did not know how far we went. And he wanted to come see me right away. And I said, I have to leave in 45 minutes to meet my family, because we were going to Closing Day Olympics in 1984 when I called him. So I'll never forget what day that was, August 11th, 1984. And I said, I have to meet my husband and my kids and get on the bus to go down to the Coliseum. And so, where are you? And he told me where he was, and I said, well, that's at least 45 minutes away, so there's no way we can even look at each other for a minute. So we exchanged some information. We exchanged addresses and home phone numbers and things. But before the conversation was over with, he said, where's our daughter? And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to start looking for her. And we decided on the phone that day we would do it together. So we did. And, well, later. And I told him we were going camping after we left Pasadena, and I would be home in a week. And I didn't really think I really would hear from him. But 9 o'clock that next Monday morning, when he knew I was supposed to be home, the phone rang. And he said, hello, just the way he used to always say it. And I just melted, and I fell in love with him all over again, and I had to deal with that. It took about 1.5 years for us to get that out of our systems. We did not consummate anything again, but I'm sure if we both had not realized that would be the ruin of ourselves and everything, we probably would have done it immediately. But we talked, and we talked, and we talked for hours on the phone. And my phone bill during that time was so horrendous. That's when I learned you can't hide the phone bill from your husband, and that it's acceptable behavior. And now my husband does not even want to see it, because now I am a searcher, so now I'm on the phone even more. And that he is more than glad to say, I've decided it would be painful and I don't want to see it, so we just let her take care of it. And we talked and we talked and we healed the issues and found out why we broke up with one another, and how awful it was for him to see his daughter in the nursery, and to come into the maternity home and see all the other pregnant girls and all the 9 yards. I mean, everyone I know knows what you would like to talk to the birth father about. And so we got to clear a lot of that up, and we reunited again, and got together with some of our other friends, which was also healing. And he had to deal with it, you know, too. He said that he had not really been able to get into a real comfortable relationship and marry until after we had healed everything. And when he turned 40, he had his midlife crisis and left the woman he had lived with for several years. They were not married and had one stillborn child together. So our daughter together is his only child. And after that, he was able to get into a relationship with someone and married a couple years ago. and they are now trying to get pregnant. They could even be pregnant right now. And so it was a healing process for him and a healing process for me. And I'm really glad that my friends made me make that phone call that day, because I might have waited until after the search to contact him to say that I had found Laura. But I think it was the best thing for me to have him with me while I was searching, because I had someone to talk to about my feelings that was there, and there with me every minute he could possibly be with me. And so I love and respect him for that. And that's my story, yes.
Was your husband aware that you were in contact with him again?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's an interesting story, yes. Yes, I told my husband, first of all, when I first met him, I felt that he had to know I was, quote, those damaged goods, because, I wouldn't want it to come out later. And we sat down on my bed in my apartment one night, and I said, there's something I need to tell you. And there was a party going on in the front room. So the only private place was to go off, and I felt, I really need to get this really out in the open. So I told him, I said, I just want you to know that, May, I had a baby. I have a daughter. And he said, I know. I went, wait a minute, I've never told another soul since it happened. It's only been 6 months. And he told me that this other gal had told him. I realized there was a person I had told, and she had been a birth mother in a booth the year before. This was the ex-girlfriend of my husband's, that I had stolen him away from her. And so she was a little hostile and bitter. And so she says, well, she's the birth mother. I mean, they didn't have the word birth mother then, but, she had a baby and was hoping he wouldn't date me. He thought it was fine. So, of course, I turned around and said, well, Chris had a baby, too, a year before me, so she was a little more promiscuous and faster than I was. And got her. Anyway, and it didn't matter to him. It didn't matter that I was a birth mother. He said, it doesn't matter. And he knew I was dating Mike, still at the same time we were dating. But to bring it to the current time, in 1984, when this was going on, when I got back to my brother's house that morning after talking to Mike, I walked in, and the first thing he said, did you have a good time with your friends? And I said, oh yes, it was really neat to get back together. Some of us had not seen each other for 20 years, and so it was really great. And I said, and by the way, I talked to Mike on the phone. I didn't have to say his last name. It was certainly understood who it was. And he just said, oh, okay. And I said, yeah. I said it was really neat to talk to him. And then we loaded up the van and did all these things that we had to do. And when we went camping the next day, we were driving up in the local mountains, and the only radio station I could get was K-Earth. How many people know what K-Earth is? The oldies but goodies station of Los Angeles. Well, they were playing Motown, the Supremes, the Four Tops, the Temptations, all these songs of our love affair. Yes, I'm ready. That was our song. And so forth. They were playing all this music, and my kids were in the back going, Mom, can you change the radio station? This is horrible. Direct radio. And my husband was so sweet and said, she's doing a little reminiscing here. And we'll just leave it on this day. Put a tape in. And so I sat there staring out the window, driving up the mountains, just having flashbacks. And so that's a story I like to tell about my husband, to say that how understanding he was. When the phone call started, no, he did not know that we were talking every day for 2, 3, 4 hours on a stretch. But I'm not kidding about the phone bill. And Mike had no money at the time, so it was always on mine. And finally I went up to see Mike after about 2 months. And when I got home, my husband was a little hesitant to ask how it was, but he said, I finally went and said, normally you ask me how everything went. You're not asking me. And he says, well, how was it? And I said, it was very nice, but I was nervous at first. But by the time I left, everything was fine. We just sat around, talked, and had lunch. And I came home, and driving from LA to San Diego, traffic has got to be bad. So I had a lot of time to think on my way home. And then several weeks later, I went in. I could tell my husband was very nervous, because he could tell that I was talking to Mike, and he'd hear me talking to other Cub members and my support people in that group on the phone about, he had said this, and I feel this way about it, and how you are when you're trying to deal with problems. And I went in. My husband was sitting in bed reading one night, and I walked in and I sat down on the edge of bed and I said, I think we need to talk. And he got scared to death. And I think he thought I was going to ask for a divorce and that I was going to run off with a birth father. And I just said, I just want to let you know that I love you very much and that Mike is back in my life as a friend. And you need to know that, you know, and that I will talk to him. I wish I'd come up with what Cindy had said. It's like being an ex-husband. That would have been great. You know, gosh, I might even have to tell him that when I get home. And, you know, he just looked so relieved. I mean, I think he really felt, because I had gotten so wrapped up in the whole thing. You know, he's a really neat man, my husband. Anyway, I am Bob. Here, Bob, wait. You have to, Bob, you have to hold this little thing.
No, I don't have my voice. My name is Bob, and as I was listening to Curry, you relive a lot of things, and there's a lot of parallels. And yes, there's a lot of actual opposites in relationships with spouses. I'll get into that later. I had moved to Burlington, Iowa as a young sales manager, 23, from Rockford, Illinois. And no one in that town was working tremendous hours, and met this, I was in the grocery business, food business, and met this little gal who was a checker. And we started dating. And we just dated as young kids for a while, and met her parents, and they thought I was a pretty neat guy. And they really liked me. And so Mary and I were just kind of dating casually. It was kind of a period where we weren't dating as much. I wasn't going over there. And her dad said, where's that young man Bob? I haven't seen him lately. Why don't you have him come over for dinner? You really like it. So it happened to have been Easter Sunday. So we went over there, and they had this big picnic table. Kind of a lower class, I don't mean lower, they were socioeconomically a big family, and they had this big picnic table in the kitchen, and there must have been 15 or 20 people around that Easter table. And old Carl was at one end, this old German, and I was at the other end, and he said, we will now say grace. So everybody bowed their head, and I go like this. And we had dinner, and everything was wonderful, except after dinner, nobody talked to me. So I said to Mary, what did I do? You know, she says, nobody is talking to me. Well, they were staunch Lutherans, and when old Carl looked up and saw me make the sign of the cross, he said, is Bob Catholic? And she said, yes. And he said, well, I forbid you to see him anymore. Well, of course, you know, that's like, that has no bearing. So
It's like a racial thing.
yeah, it was very, at that time, it was as strong as a racial issue at that point. I was persona non grata in that house. So we did continue to date, and Mary got pregnant. And that religion played a big part in our decision. Of course, I was shocked, she was shocked, what do you do? And so I went, as a good Catholic boy was taught to do, you go to your priest to find out answers. And we talked and counseled, and he asked pertinent questions like, would you marry her if she were not pregnant? And I said, I don't know at this point. Do you love her? Yes. And that. He said, well, unless you're really sure, don't make a second mistake to cover a first mistake. And then there are ways of handling this situation. And what are my options? Okay, put her in a home for unwed mothers. Well, where do you find these places? So he had it all lined up. So I remember Mary put down, because we have had contact, that I did offer to get married. I remember it was discussed, but it was pretty much with me an issue of fear of, I was raised, you get one shot at marriage. If it's wrong, you don't have a second shot. So that was very strong. The interreligious thing was not as strong an issue, but at least not being accepted in the family sure as hell had an issue. So I was afraid of getting married, the fear of God of getting married and because she was pregnant and then not having it work out, that I would never be able to get married again, because then I would have been divorced, and divorce in the Catholic Church was terrible. Because that was worse than having a baby out of wedlock. So anyhow, I did the arrangement for Mary to go to this home in a little town called Grinnell, Iowa. And I remember that this is a little foggy. I was trying to think if I drove her up there, because we had a lot of contact afterwards. And I remember her saying, no, I want to do this alone. She had her own car. I'll go up there. So she did go up there alone, and I would drive up there and visit her. I had this neat little Chevy convertible, and I would take all the pregnant girls up to the local drive-in, and we'd have root beer floats. And I was the biggest hero because no other I was the only birth father that showed up. And I would go in with these 4 or 5 pregnant girls. And I'm sure they went, what the hell's going on? And I had my little motel room, and they would come back there. Thanks, Curry. I didn't have any little remarks when I was going to kill a couple. But no, and these women would, come in, all these pregnant women going in and out of my motel room. So we had a lot of laughs over that one. I do remember that. Had the baby. I had no after the baby was born, everything is blank from then on for a while. There was no lawyer contact. There was no going to see a lawyer. There was. Her parents didn't know. My parents didn't know. Her parents found out because when I called the home to get directions, I wrote it on a notepad and tore off the notepad, and it was a long-distance call. So that was the only thing that I could figure out. That we figured out that's how her parents found out where she was. They never talked about it. There was no contact. She just wrote a note and said, I'm leaving for personal reasons, goodbye, basically, and never told her parents. I never told my parents, and that was it. We told no friends. It was a secret. In fact, it was a secret with both of us for 25 years. So she had the baby. She moved on to Denver, went to work for Continental Airlines. I moved on to California. Stopped and saw her afterwards, and there was no animosity. In fact, I was at that time engaged on my way to California, stopped and saw her. So from that standpoint, it was just a couple of kids that you really didn't realize your options and choices, and at that time, the influences of the church, the influences of society, the influences of the parents, all the authority figures really didn't allow you to make decisions of the heart because you had a lot of fear. I know that's what I dealt from. I dealt from a lot of fear, a lot of fear. So that's basically as far as what happened in how we got pregnant, how we handled it, and what happened afterwards. And that's where Cindy wanted me to stop at that aspect.
John? You're next.
These are tough acts to follow.
We'd have to take the microphone and touch it.
Why, didn't you ever read Convertible?
No, I think I had a 61 Studebaker is what it was at that time. This really is painful to think about some of these things, but I'll try to get through this. I was 17. The birth mother was 16. Parents found out about it. Whew. I remember sitting in a room and my parents yelling at me for 2.5 hours. I mean, it was like, this is the worst thing you could have possibly done. You've embarrassed us, you da-da-da-da-da. All that good emotional knives, they could stick in there. Anyway, the way the outcome came out was the doctor, I think, arranged for the mother to go to a place that I guess people in this room are familiar with, St. Anne's, and where daughter was born September the 25th, 1967, and I was very close to the birth mother. We dated afterwards. In fact, if you look at the way society looked at this was a mistake, you made it, get rid of it.
This is the end of Side A. Please turn your tape over and continue on Side B. The American Adoption Congress, 13th International Conference, April 11th to the 14th, 1991 in Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, tape number 54B.
About expressive work or things that are...
Yes, expressive work, because this is all pre-verbal. We don't have words for these things. After a while, one can form words for them, but first things have to be worked out. My therapy probably wouldn't be approved by the APA, you know, because I do hold people, and I do let them vent their rage at me. Well, you know, one young man came up to me and he grabbed me and he hugged me and he says, "I love you and I hate you and I'd love to kill you." You know, I mean, that's the way he felt all at once, all this love and hate, all in one big gesture, you know. And I'm sure that they, you know, that's not supposed to happen, but it happens, and this is the only way. I can't do therapy with adoptees the way other people do therapy, because but now the other thing is that people who work with adoptees have to also have done their own work on their early life issues, because if they don't, they get the adoptee stuck in infanthood and they never ever get out. So you can't let the adoptee stay there at 6 months old forever and just, you know, wallow in this wonderful holding situation. You have to push them out of the nest. You know, you have to wean them, you might say. They don't do this on their own. Why, they would love being there forever. Who wouldn't? Well, I could give a whole... Okay, Maureen?
As an adoptee and as a therapist and as someone who, when received the diagnosis of borderline and or narcissist, she couldn't decide which. And I should say I deserved it. I was great. I was very nice and very great. And what began to resolve that was a movement towards search.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what begins to move you from the infantile stage towards a selfhood.
That's true, but also now when you meet that birth mother, you're going to go zooming right back to babyhood. And
but then you have to resolve that.
Then you have to resolve that. That's right, and that's what you were talking about, rebonding with the mother at that stage. And you know, as we were talking about yesterday in the session on the sexual aspects, you know, you have to be very careful about that, because I have clients who are, you know, 28-year-old males who are feeling sexual feelings, for instance, toward their birth mothers or their birth sister or half sisters and so on and so forth. And there needs to be boundaries around what one does, and one has to just use their common sense. And I mean, I have to do that in my own practice, or I could lose my practice. But you have to use common sense. But I think you do. You need to start that bonding at the beginning of it, and then the birth mother too has to realize that her child is going to go through a whole range of feelings about her, including all the rage, and she's going to have to just accept it. You know, she is the mother after all, and she's feeling so vulnerable herself. She's feeling so tired and so, you know, so wrung out. But she has to be the one to allow those feelings, just as the adoptive mother does. You know, the adoptive mother feels really rejected a lot of the time. My daughter put me through the ringer every day. You know, I mean, she did. She tested me every day. And I had to set boundaries for her that she would bang against and really swear at me for. But I held on to those boundaries. And she would call up her friends on the telephone and say how lame her friends' parents were because they didn't care where their kids were. You know, that's the only reason I knew that she that she was getting what I was doing. Yes.
Have you explored the psychology of Sullivan in the 50s? He did a lot of prenatal psychology.
Yes, some. I have. I'm not real versed on Sullivan. No.
So, I think one of his theories was the nipple in the mouth theory on breastfeeding. That if breastfeeding wasn't done naturally with the birth mother, there were some effects thereafter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's any like relevance in that?
Well, I think that breastfeeding is very important to the bonding. I think the whole way we do obstetrics in this country is absolutely nuts. I mean, why do they separate those babies and their mothers? Why? What is that nursery doing there? Close the nursery. You know, babies and their mothers should not be separated. This baby comes from this warm place where they're completely connected to the mother. Then the next best thing is to just be right next to her all the time for a while, you know? And to be put over in a nursery far away from her and brought back every once in a while. I mean, all of us have abandonment issues because of that, I believe, and I think we wouldn't be such a neurotic society if we didn't do that. I really think abandonment is it. Yes.
So obviously the incubator experience.
Oh yes, exactly. But Ronaldo Maduro did a study on that, which every single item that he was talking about that this baby who'd been in an incubator was feeling is exactly what adoptees said they're feeling. You know, I mean, it's about abandonment. It isn't about adoption. It's about abandonment. It's just that every adopted child is abandoned, in a sense. Yes.
I just really want to thank you. I appreciate what you're saying so much, and I feel like, especially, I feel what I hear here, and I just want to say it out loud for myself and for you or whoever else. It's just an acknowledgement of the power differences and power imbalances that happen when you're an adoptee and a birth parent and an adoptive parent.
Mm-hmm.
And what I hear you saying is that the adoptee, and this is what I have felt and I've been trying to get, and I don't feel like I have gotten, has been able to express myself and just be heard and accepted for what I have to say,
Yeah.
however irrational or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I really just think it's so healing to hear what you're saying, and it gives me a lot of hope, and I hope that, you know, this can happen in a setting where we can hear each other that way, because I feel like that will get me beyond that place. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. One of the things I think that all of you adoptees ought to do is go back to your adoptive parents and check out all your perceptions. Because, you know, one of the things that I find is that adoptees, just like everybody else, have their own perceptions, and their perceptions are based on past experience. So a lot of the way they think their adoptive parents feel have to do with the fact that they were already separated from their mothers. And a lot of these expectations that they think their adoptive parents had for them may have been coming from within their own heads, you know, that I wasn't good enough before, so I have to do something different this time. And one of the things that I notice in my own daughter is that she has the name of her birth mother. She can find her any time. I'm willing to help her. I can hardly wait to meet her myself. But she hasn't done it yet. And when I said I'd help her when she was about 14, she looked at me and she said, "Are you trying to get rid of me, Mom?" You know, so the rejection thing is so much on the surface that you have to be careful. A lot of adoptive parents have told me, well, I try to talk about adoption to my child, but they don't want to talk about it. You know, and so it's not always coming from the source that you think it's coming from. Yeah.
I was wondering if you're familiar with the work of Barbara Finn Dyson
Mm-hmm.
and prenatal thoughts and affirmations that are made by the individual even before they're born.
Yes, Barbara Finn Dyson will probably be at the Pre and Perinatal Association convention that I'm going to in July. Yeah, she does a lot of work with that, all that prenatal preparation kind of work, which is very important. Yes. Hello.
I came in late, and I don't know if you've dealt with this or not. But in my practice over the years, there's been such a difference in adoptees who were taken away at birth and those who had a few months or more with their birth parents before relinquishment and placement. Did you address that at all?
No, I didn't. You know, this is something I'd like to explore further, though, because I think that there's something that needs to happen at the beginning of a child's life that can only happen with the birth mother. And, you know, the trouble is, how many birth mothers are going to keep these children for 3 months, say, and then give them up?
You know, there was a period in maternity homes where birth mothers came back for 3 months.
Yeah?
Early on.
I think it would be helpful, because the sense of self part of it, you know, is when you feel as if you're part of a whole. Let's say that the adoptee or the baby and the mother are like a plate, you know, and if the plate is broken, for instance, if you take it away to the incubator, or the mother disappears for some reason, and you glue it back together, and you put the pieces carefully back together, well, you've got a good fit because they both came from the same thing, you know. The only problem is you've got glue in between, you know, and that glue is not going to be as strong as the original whole plate. Now, if you take that plate and you have half of it over here and you bring another whole different broken plate and put it next to it, and it's not going to fit right, you know, it's just not. Some will fit better than others, but they're never ever going to fit as well as that original whole plate. You've got the glue too, and on top of that you've got a fit that isn't quite right. So if you can keep the baby and mother together for a while, yes, I think that would be helpful. You know, Joseph Chilton Pierce thinks that a lot of the stuff, the brain connections and so forth, are triggered by that bonding, and that it gets.
So for me, that's the first sense of self.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The Kohut forgot about that in his whole self-psychology.
Well, a lot of these people have forgotten it all. Winnicott's the only one that has a clue, you know. Read Donald Winnicott. He's the only, I think he's the only man in the whole world who knew what it was like to be a mother. Okay, we still have some time, I guess. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to, I'm a birth mom,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm trying to work with professionals in terms of helping to educate softly and gently. But what I hear from professionals is that given what we are beginning to know, that the birth mother still must make her own choice. And one of the things that I talk about is that within her making a choice, isn't it time that we need to advocate for her, knowing that we know now that it really is no longer a case where she can make a free choice, that we really have to start advocating for the child and saying,
Yes.
this really is what would be best for your child.
Well,
it's not a choice whether or not you do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. I agree with you. You know, we're always talking about, well, what does the adoptive parent want? What does the birth mother want? Well, what's best for the baby? I mean, the baby is the one being completely manipulated in this whole thing. You know, I mean, certainly birth mothers are manipulated and coerced and whatever you want to say, but they did not get completely taken away from their family. They, you know, the baby is the one that we need to be concerned about. They're the helpless being here. And yes, I agree with you. I think we need to tell them, well, look, this happened to you, and you need to know that if you separate from this baby, your baby is going to suffer a trauma. I mean, the whole idea of surrogate mothers just drives me nuts. I mean, in the first place, the surrogate mother, the real mother, the mother who gives birth, is called a surrogate. You know, we change things around and call them something different and give it legitimacy. But that surrogate mother needs to know that she's setting her baby up for psychological trauma, and herself too, which she doesn't know yet. Yes.
There's a new or relinquishment for California Statement of Understanding, which for parents must read, and they show that they've read all these things. And one of the changes that was made was to add a statement to this effect that workers are supposed to explain the long-range implications to birth parents for what they're considering doing. And I think, you know, I talk to the state and say, well, we don't even know what they are, because you need to learn. But I think, you know, this in that even at the bureaucratic level, we recognize that this needs to be done, and, you know, how you do it, what are the long-range implications, and what you know, do communicate
Yeah.
with birth parents. That's more than, you know, saying, but it's there in our state.
Good. What state is that? This state, California? Good. Yes.
Well, I'm wondering, in terms of trauma to a child, you know, I'm just really struck with the whole idea of the primal wound of a newborn. But I'm wondering, in terms of the wound of a child who stays with a mother who doesn't want the child, and is raised, you know, with the mother nearby but not wanting the child, you know, like some of the issues that people are dealing with in, you know, adult children of alcoholics, where mom's there but
not there. Right.
And then the idea of taking the child at 3 months with the baby having that additional awareness of mom, and the mom being removed, somehow seems to me could also have profound.
Oh, it will. I mean, you're not going to take the baby away without.
Whether it's day 1 or day
Right.
37 or 42
Or age 5 years or 7 or so forth. That's right.
to think that that's not still going to be profound.
It certainly is going to be profound. What I think that what Annette was trying to say, though, was that there are certain things that happen in the body which get triggered by hormones between the mother and child that may get stopped if the baby is taken away from the mother. Psychological trauma is going to be there no matter what. but there are certain things that happen for the baby, the synapses which begin to, whatever the synapses do, all those kinds of things that get stopped and get interrupted if the baby is taken away from the child. Now, babies compensate. I mean, human beings are very adaptable beings, you know. The problem is, as I said, that sometimes adaptation means shutting things down. And what we need to do is begin to allow these children to explore different ways in which to express themselves, because and they're not going to trust it at first. You're not going to tell a child it's okay to express your anger and have them believe you for a minute. But someday he's going to try it anyway, and then it's up to you as the adoptive parent or whoever, or up to you as the birth mother who is now reunited with your child, to say, yeah, you must be pretty angry. I mean, I have adoptive mothers who come up to me and say, you know, when my baby was 2 years old and was crying in bed one night, I went in to comfort him, and he said, I want my mommy. And I said, well, mommy's here, sweetheart. And he said, no, I want my other mommy. Babies remember their birth and subsequent events up until about age 2.5. The problem is they don't have words for it most of the time. So if they do have words for it, you can ask them all kinds of interesting questions, like how they came down the birth canal and all kinds of things, and they can probably tell you. So they do, and my daughter did that. I mean, she didn't say, I want my mommy, but she wouldn't let me comfort her. I was obviously not the right mommy, and I didn't know that. But if I had known it, I would have done what one of my friends did. She just said, well, you must miss her, don't you, Todd? You know, and the baby knows that you understand. And that understanding goes a long way toward the bonding between the adoptive mother and child. It's when the mother feels rejected by that and they go stomping off herself that the baby knows, you know, she doesn't know. Yes? Mm-hmm.
I know I wrote about when I was really young and felt a hole, like
yes.
the whole left side of my body was dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wanted to find my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what I did ever, and even through art and stuff, I could never reach anything in that space. And that's really common. Like I mean, I know many adoptees who identify with that.
Yes, that's right.
And I think, I mean, it's exciting to kind of hear all this, because I was trying to figure things out on my own and figured that, and I sort of felt that this space was something I killed, and a death, you know, that I killed part of myself through my separation from my mom, and I did it so that I could continue and that I could continue to live, and then came full circle, like in finding you, it's born again, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that space is what finally those feelings are allowed to happen, because if I hadn't done that and I allowed those feelings to happen, I might not have been able to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if you hear it.
Oh yes, that whole, one woman said, there's a great big empty space inside me, that would be my birth mother. You know, it's this, she's the only one that can feel that space. And for adoptive mothers, they have to realize that they're never going to fill that space, that they're never going to take the place of the birth mother, and that they need to recognize that and stop trying so that the child doesn't have to guard that place in his heart so much, you know. I think when I finally came to that conclusion with my own daughter, and it was a real soul-searching thing to do, I want to tell you, that I really wasn't going to take the place of that birth mother the way I'd been promised I would. But when I stopped that, when I got that transpersonal in my understanding of my child and realized that, you know, we don't any of us own them anyway, it's hard though to get to that place. I think that she felt it. I never said anything to her about it, but it's as if she could begin to get closer to me from that day on, because I wasn't a threat to that spot or that hole that she was saving for her birth mother. And I wish she would look for her birth mother. I think she will someday. I know she will someday.
Courageous statement to hear from you, and I really appreciate
Well, the other really hard thing for adoptive mothers is to know you can't take away your child's pain. Yes?
Would that be so even in the case of a child who had lived with a birth family for the first 18 months of its life, And then because of a benign neglect, was placed with a foster family for a year and didn't connect with anyone at that foster family. Turned around, walked off into the sunset and never looked back with the family that eventually adopted him, and clings to everyone. Anyone and everyone, but is not connected to anyone.
Yeah.
That even with the neglect and the foster family and now this incredible love of the adopted family, that child is still going to have that wound.
That's right. That's right. And we'll probably need to find her mother again someday to help fill that space. Yes.
I'm an adoptee and a birth parent, and part of my healing was to do Bradshaw, and I just did his inner child workshop, and your material was very much similar to the stuff that he talked about in all three of his books, Homecoming and Championing the Inner Child. And there was a lot of discussion brought up at the meetings from adoptees and birth parents too, and yet he could not address it because he is not familiar with the issue. And I think that a book on this subject using that material is very, very important, because a lot of adoptees were talking about, well, we're doing this work and we're not honoring our our adopted parents by healing this inner child within us. And that was a discussion that was brought up, and nobody could answer those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I know. It's just, as I say, there's a blackout in awareness. When it comes to adoption, nowhere in the literature have I ever found anyone saying the children in a family will have a different experience if they come from the biological parents or if they come from adoptive parents, or if they live with adoptive parents. There's no differentiation anywhere in the literature that I have found about that, except for individual articles here and there. And then they can't figure out why it should be that way in those articles, like, why should that be? Yes?
I don't feel particularly reconnected with my birth mother. On the other hand, my search, the 3 years of doing the search, appears to be very beneficial to me. In fact, I told the attorney just recently that got my records open that I wanted him to know that he was responsible for a whole new life for me. It's almost as though he gave me life or I'm born again. But this thing between my birth mother or a birth mother and a child or an adult, I still don't feel that with her. And it isn't just her, it's still me.
It could be that you don't trust her, and you still don't trust her, that you still think she's going to disappear. And so you're not willing to reconnect with her. I don't know, but it may be that lack of trust. Trust is certainly an issue. I know that, yes.
Yeah, my understanding too, the history of adoption is this business of secrecy and the need to search and find it is a very modern aberration. And that historically adoptions were not in most cultures secret. You knew it was a closed, village tribe system anyway. And so I think maybe just our minds, as we've evolved as human beings, there's the whole thing that doesn't make any sense. It hasn't been dealt with. I'm surprised about Bradshaw and all the work he's done. Really, had his eyes open yet.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, in this whole new book that just came out this year, it's heralded as the great book on child psychology, healing the hurt child. It's full of wonderful clinical words, and it's a good book. But when you get to that part on adoption, it just all falls apart. I mean, how can he make a statement? You should not keep secrets. He was talking about things like, if you had an abortion before this child was born, or if you had a miscarriage before this child is born, who's acting out all over the place over here, somehow that child knows that information, knows it's impacting on your family, and that's causing the behavior. He's talking about something that the child didn't even witness is going to impact on his life, but then when it comes to adoption, the child doesn't have to know about it. That just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to any of us in this room. Yes.
Yes, I'd like to know what is being done to bring this
share with the pregnant mothers?
Yes. Well, I gave a talk not long ago, a week ago, Thursday actually, to a psychiatric hospital, which is a step, trying to teach them about the primal wound. And they were actually very accepting of it, which I was surprised about. I only had one psychiatrist come up and ask me something about, well, but what about the gene pool? I said, well, what do you mean about that? Are you talking about the bad seed? Well, he says, they get in generational things where one adoptee has a baby and has another baby and has another baby, and I said, and how does that affect the gene pool? I mean, what's that going to do to it? What we're doing is talking about an environmental problem, a pain, a wound that's happening. I said, it's the wound that causes the behavior, not because the child has bad genes, Yes.
Could you comment on the extraordinary statistic of 38% of birth mothers who don't have any other children?
Well, one of the things that they will say, I mean, there are various things that birth mothers will say. For one, they'll say, I have to be loyal to that baby. Or they'll say, I wasn't a good mother and I have no right to have another child. Those kinds of things. It's loyalty issues, it's issues of not feeling like a good mother, all those kinds of things. And these are fertile women, so this is a very high statistic. And in some areas, it's even higher than 38%.
In regards to that, I'm a birth mother.
Uh-huh.
I had another child, but the birth father, no way.
Oh, really?
He has not forgiven himself for the fact that he was not available when his child needed him, and has done everything he can to be sure he feels unworthy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we leave out the fathers a lot in these things, and I don't think that's quite fair, because a lot of them do have very strong feelings about that.
Nancy, do you think that the birth parent, or especially the birth mother, but I don't want to say especially, on some level be primal as well?
The birth father?
The birth mother's experience of the separation from the child can be primal in nature as well, not as profoundly as for the child, but also very primal and unable, where you're not able to put words to it.
Of course, yeah, because it's such a natural, instinctive thing to want to keep your baby with you, and to have this not happen goes against everything you've been preparing for 9 months. And it isn't even anything you can, as you say, talk about. There really aren't words for the way you feel. And yes, I think it's a primal on both sides. I absolutely do, yeah.
I mean, I look at this as just being the miracle of life, and our society is not set up to support the reproduction of human beings.
No, I hear people say, I want a baby, but I don't want children to interfere in my life. And I say, I get really nervous when people say, I want to have a baby. I'd rather hear them say, I want to rear children. Because I know people who, couples who both of them are making $100,000 a year. They have a baby, they hire a nanny, they change the nanny every 6 months, and they think they're rearing children, And I don't know what the answer is. I think that in our society we do not value children. They aren't productive. They are not productive. They do not bring in any money. In fact, they cost a lot of money. But so we don't value things that don't produce. Now all of you can begin to change that. I mean, we have to change. I mean, I think the women's movement had a great deal to do with that. I'm sorry to say, but at the beginning of the women's movement, I remember an article, and I wrote a scathing letter to the editor about it, which didn't get published. But I remember an article in the Saturday Review years ago, when my children were small, about mothers who stayed home with their babies were just too unintelligent to do anything else. There wasn't the idea of choice that we like to talk about now, but now we've got ourselves in such a pickle that we really don't have a choice. I had much more choice when I had my children than young women do today. They don't have the choice to stay home and take care of their babies, and many of them would like to. Many of them would like to. So we've done this to ourselves somehow. We have to somehow get ourselves out of it. Yes?
I am a product of incest.
Uh-huh.
I found my mother and she is in denial.
I can't hear you.
I'm a product of incest, and my mother I have found, and denial. Was she in denial the whole time?
I can't speak for your mother, but
It would be a negative, I would think.
it would probably have been very hard for her the whole pregnancy, you know, probably, yeah, wishing, bargaining, doing all the,
So I can't even ask her because she won't talk about it.
yeah. You're going to have to work that out with a therapist or something like that, I think. Yeah. And they were.
And the moms, you know, I can only speak for these cases they knew, and they were talking about it, and, you know, it was definitely something difficult to handle.
Yeah.
Societal attitude, but not all moms, at least, are in denial full time.
You have asked your mom about it, though. She just won't talk about it, is it? She won't talk to you? Yeah. You can understand it, but what do you feel about it? Yeah, that's something else. Yeah.
Going back to what you were just saying before about taking it on and being more active, what steps can we say we can all take further to explore the issues that we're discussing, and not just discuss it, but what are your ideas for the next steps or your work?
Well, advocate for children whenever you can. You know, all these cases of, you know, some of these things are really hard choices, like all these cases of child abuse. What are you going to do in cases of child abuse? Are you going to take the child out of the home and abuse him even further? Or leave him in there and have him abused every day? What are we going to do? We have to make choices. What we have to do, though, is we have to learn to admit that when we take a child away from the parents, that is going to be abuse. And we have to weigh which is the greater abuse. And when there are bills about children in the legislature, let's get out there and fight for those bills, because it's just a difficult problem when our society does not value. I mean, we don't value children or older people. You know, you can each do it in your own way. We each have our own strengths, and we have to know in what way we can do the work. But I'll try to get my book written. Yes.
I agree with you that this business with a child being with a mom may in fact be necessary for developmental tasks, brain connections, and you know the research that's been done with rats.
Yes.
Yeah. With the genitals of their offspring.
That's right.
Within a certain number of hours of birth, or else they don't develop into normal rats.
Yes. Yes. And I also think that there might not be I think there might not be so much postpartum depression if they would stop taking babies in their separating babies in their mothers, because you're geared for something that doesn't happen, and your body goes into shock, and your whole system goes into depression. So we have to. That's another thing. Get rid of the nurseries in hospitals. Fight for that. Yes.
This just came to me. The practice is important to me, and when I read about it, it bothers me as a birth mother. I suppose it comes naturally. When I read of these open adoptions that are taking place, where the adoptive parents are so involved in the pregnancy, pretending that they are part of this pregnancy, and even going so far as to say that they are pregnant when they are not. And then they are in the delivery room with the birth mother, and the child is delivered into the hands of the adopting father, and the cord is cut by the adopting mother. I want to know what kind of effect that has on the infant.
Well, if you want my opinion, not a good effect. I do not believe adoptive parents should be in the birthing room. I used to think this was a good idea. And we're going through all kinds of things trying to find out how to do this best. It's not that anybody's being malicious. It's not that they're trying to snatch the baby away. Adoptive parents were told that this would enhance the bonding process. They think this is a good idea. And so they're encouraged to do this by all the people who are, in this business, I guess. But I just don't think that birth mother has a true choice when that mother is in the room, because how can she say to that mother who's right there, I want to keep my baby. No, you can't have her. I think that she needs time with the baby. I think she needs to be able to hold the baby. Now, some of them won't do it. Some of them refuse to do it. They say, I can't hold my baby. I don't want to even see my baby. And the fear is, of course, that they're going to bond with the baby and won't want to give it away. But I don't think they should be in the room. Yes?
I guess I want to respond because she described exactly what we did. And I don't want to be defending it,
Mm-hmm.
just saying that's what we did. And the birth mother spent the 3 days in the hospital with the baby lots and lots of time.
Mm-hmm.
And did all the night feedings and spent all as much time as she wanted to with the baby. And really it was, I don't know what to say other than it wasn't there to be, the nurses saw us as vultures. The birth mother saw us as allies. We were there in her support as well as to enjoy this wonderful event that was taking place with her. And she had other advocates for her besides us there. But it wasn't, I personally don't know why it was worse for me to cut the cord than it would have been for the doctor.
Well, as far as cutting the cord, maybe not.
What's the concern there, but it was, and I understand what you're saying, and maybe you see that it was a pressure, but she had a lot of time alone.
But was she going to disappoint you at that point,
Well, lots of birth mothers do change their mind.
Yeah.
She had people, I understand, but would it have been better for us to not have had that opportunity to develop some trust between us and her and,
Yeah, I think that the trust, the building up of trust and the knowing the prospective adoptive parents is a good thing, because it does give the birth mother a feeling of having some control over where her baby goes. And I think it makes the intrauterine climate for the baby better when she doesn't have that anxiety about where her baby's going. But to have the adoptive parents, many of these birth mothers are in complete denial about how they're going to feel when that baby's born. They don't have the faintest. I tried to talk to them about, are you aware that you are going to feel a great deal of loss? Oh yeah, but da. They don't have any idea how profound that loss is going to be, or how they're going to feel about that baby when it's a reality, And so, and then to have someone else there who wants that baby is a real difficult situation for her, because she's at her most vulnerable. She shouldn't be making decisions about what kind of toothpaste to use, And so I know that you did all of this with the best intentions, because this is what we've been trying to figure out. How can we make this easier for the baby? How can we make the transition easier for the baby? You're not. You're not. If the baby can't be with the mother, the baby's going to suffer the trauma. So forget about that. You're doing all this for yourselves. You're not doing it for the baby. No, I know. I'm not saying that you did say that, but it's a difficult situation. And I know that, but when my daughter saw one of those kinds of births on television, she practically got physically sick. She did. She just felt sick when she saw that. And I used to advocate this myself. I thought it would be better, Yes?
I agree, and I want to reinforce what you're saying, because there have been births, health births for every mother who was giving birth, almost every mother who was giving birth. I guess in some societies for birth. But the baby always needs to be attached with the mother, and it doesn't bother with strangers, the doctors, the midwives.
That's right.
I'm a birth mother. My son in the hospital, I was using the nurses, but whenever the nurses would bring him, he would get perk up as soon as he saw me. And when he left the hospital with the social worker, I saw him going through the elevator doors, and he looked so frightened and scared. And I felt that.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember that very, very, very vivid images of it.
And when they placed him in my arms just after his birth, I, 10 years later, drew a picture of him just as he was. At that time, it was very, again, a very vivid image. And this is before Klaus and Kennel published their book about maternal infant bonding. And I think to try and, I think in adoption, everybody tries to get in and create the fantasy, create the reality of birthing for adoptive parents, and it can't be done. It just can't be done, and it shouldn't. I think the attempt should be focused on not having so many adoptions, supporting the birth mothers as mothers, and not taking advantage of their vulnerability.
Yes, I agree.
They are pregnant and in a difficult situation.
Are we supposed to? Thank you. I'm supposed to be out of this room. Thanks very much. Thank you.
This is the end of this session.